Welcome to Global Conversations About Boundaries. I'm Sarri Gilman. I'm a marriage and family therapist, and I've written the book, Transform Your Boundaries. And I'm here today with Hayden Bixby. Hayden is faculty at Edmonds Community College, and she is the writer of some posts called Small Good News. And I invited Hayden here to share about that and bring us into the deeper story behind Small Good News. So, Hayden, what is the focus of the posts on Facebook that you write called Small Good News?
Thank you for having me, Sarri. And this is just the latest of my little experiments to make social media a safer place for me. You know, I was noticing that my time on Facebook in particular was consumed with reading or forwarding or posting complaints or bad news, which is what we get a lot of these days. And I thought I needed my own way to publicly, intentionally focus on what's good around me. So there's that. And there's also the fact that I live in a neighborhood that I love, and that, am I allowed to swear?
Yes.
Because, okay, I live in Lake City, but it is unaffectionately known as Lake Shitty by people around. And I really love this neighborhood. So I wanted to celebrate not only good news, but also specifically my neighborhood, especially in this climate where immigrants are scapegoated as or demonized. I noticed that my neighborhood has a lot to celebrate in its immigrant community. So it started there too.
Could you read one or two, read two of these posts for those who haven't been receiving small good news?
Okay. I have a couple, as it turns out. These aren't so focused on immigrants, but they do highlight the issue in my community of homelessness, both of them. So here's one. This was from August 16th. Small good news. I make runs to the Bartels in my neighborhood quite often, especially to pick up ice cream when we're headed for a Netflix binge. Don't judge. There's a cashier there who calls me honey and darlin', which I normally wouldn't love. But since I'm pretty sure he calls everyone by the same terms of endearment, I kind of like it. Outside the store, a busker often plays the saxophone, which I can hear from the window of my office a block away, and which is a little sparkle of joy in the middle of a mundane errand. I always leave the store with a little cash for him and exactly $2 for the regular who sells the Real Change newspaper at the edge of the parking lot. He has a placid dog with beautiful eyes, a kind word for everyone, and an air of gratitude that makes me wish I could buy the whole stack. These characters are part of what makes my neighborhood quirky and diverse.
I don't know why, but even hearing you read it just kind of makes me cry.
Oh, Sarri.
Something so beautiful about the way you're just describing your experience in your neighborhood. Go ahead and read another one.
Thank you. Here's one from 5 days earlier. Small good news. There is an urban park in my neighborhood, which is to say that a busy corner has been designated as a kind of awkwardly shaped central square where people can gather for concerts and celebrations and whatnot. At the edge of the space is a public toilet, a thoughtful detail, especially for our local homeless community. The other day, I heard shouting and banging coming from inside that space, so I walked over to see if someone needed help. The voice from inside sounded frightened and angry and very confused and probably high, and the man was trapped in the space despite the fact that the levers for opening the door were on the inside with him. I asked, "Can you get out?" He yelled, "No!" I asked, "Do you want me to call 911 for help?" He yelled, "Yes!" So I called. We had a semi-coherent conversation while we waited, not very long, for the police to arrive. And when they did, the lead officer recognized the man by his voice and knew exactly what to do. He patiently and calmly talked the man through opening the door whenever he was ready. The officers who responded to this simple request for assistance drained the panic out of the situation and made my neighborhood feel safe and kind.
God. Boy, do we need this kind of small good news. What do you hope that these posts inspire in people?
As I said before, I didn't really theorize it as something for other people. I theorized it as something for me, to remind myself in that social media space that good news needs to be front and center, as much as or more than the negativity, the bad news. We need to know what's really happening in the world on the good and the bad side.
So on that note, then what you're really implying is that other people can also share their small good news.
Absolutely. Right.
And use kind.
Oh, sorry.
Go ahead.
It's an invitation to notice it, whether you share it or you are public about it. It's notice as you walk down the street. I love that I live in a place where I walk everywhere and there are opportunities for conversation and interaction with people, and to pause and notice that good things are happening. I think there are people who see someone selling real change or see someone playing a saxophone with a tip hat out as signs that the homeless problem is overwhelming and that we're kind of mired in a problem that we can't solve. And that is true to some extent. Someone who hears, many people who could hear this man trapped inside the porta potty didn't do anything, could hear him, walked by, or were in their car at the intersection wondering. I could see their faces reacting. What is that noise? And perhaps concluding that nothing could be done or that he was dangerous. And maybe he was. I didn't open the door myself.
But I think what you're saying is that it's also, I think what your posts do is you're also sharing about connecting to people in the community and conversing with them. And something that, nowadays people are all walking around kind of looking at their cell phones and not each other. And I think you're bringing back kind of those reminders of, it doesn't really matter if people want to post their interactions or not. What matters is reminding people about what happens when we take time to have interactions in our communities and to look at each other and talk to each other. And I think that's really essential. And I think that your posts are really bringing back the importance of conversation and connecting to each other.
Thank you. Yeah, I do think that's true, that the noticing and the intentionality of conversation where you live.
Particularly where you live. What have you learned by writing about your neighbors and your neighborhood and your interactions? What have you learned for you personally?
How thirsty people are for that news. I had multiple requests immediately among my friends to make the post public because I don't have a public Facebook page. So I've made all of these posts public, and I've had people I don't know forward the post comments on my posts. I made a post about an interaction with a little boy at a concert over the summer. And the mom of the little boy, I didn't know her, and the mom of the little boy said, "Oh, that was us. That was my family." So I've actually found connection in that social media space with my neighbors, which has been wonderful. So I think the people who have responded are eager for this kind of touch point about especially about our neighborhoods. My neighbors really also want to celebrate where we live and not just focus on the neighborhood's reputation.
Why did you move to a neighborhood that had a reputation like that?
Well, I made a post about this too. I don't know. Lake City has always intrigued me. So we lived in Kenmore for many, many years. I drove through Lake City all the time. And I guess initially my impression of it that I liked was that there really weren't any chain stores. After a while, the Bartels came in and there's a Panda Express and there's a Subway. But other than that, it's all individually owned shops and restaurants and quirky little hobby shops that you wonder, how do they stay in business? So, and it was very ethnically diverse. So there's an African shop, there are Korean markets, there's a halal Hamdi market, there's, there's just so many parts of the world represented here. So not as soon as, but pretty quickly after my younger daughter graduated from high school and we weren't tied to our school district, we moved here, rented at first to test it out, and the theory was confirmed. We love it. So we bought, and as it turns out, we bought on the same block where my dad lived when he was 3 years old. And we didn't know that when we bought the place.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah. So there were forces at play, Sarri.
Oh my gosh. That is incredible. What are your thoughts on boundaries and divisiveness that you're seeing in our country right now, and kind of the attacks on people that came as immigrants? What are your thoughts about that?
Where do we start? It feels overwhelming. It feels paralyzing. It feels like there's forces at play that are so much bigger than each of us individually, and to the point where it can make you feel like you can't get any traction to do anything about it. In my community that is filled with immigrants, it's filled with vulnerable people. It doesn't track with what this political administration is saying about who immigrants are and what solutions to our problems are going to be. It doesn't I don't look out my window and walk down my street and see what I'm told is happening. If I could fix it, I would. I don't know how. So I'm trying to do the small things that I can do. We all have our own talents that we can bring to these issues and decide how to attach ourselves to a solution rather than a problem. But I don't know that I have any more insight on that question than the next person. I'm just trying to sort it out myself.
And is small good news a part of that for you?
Absolutely. I want to use it. That boundary word is apt because it's like a protective device for me. If I wake up every morning and I know that part of my to-do list for the day is to celebrate a specific thing that I have noticed, that's a story about my neighborhood. Often it's a story that involves an immigrant to America. It's often a story that involves an entrepreneur that is working hard to build a small business. Often it's a story about somebody who is very vulnerable, homeless, drug addiction is a huge problem. It reminds me that with those problems, there are also really important points of inspiration or moments to celebrate. So that keeps the negativity at bay for me. That's a wall against feeling helpless.
I love how you describe that, a boundary as a protective mechanism. I can't help but notice as you talk about the importance of also really seeing people who are vulnerable, people who are entrepreneurial, people who are trying. I can't help but remember the first time I met you in a green room at the back of a theater. And you were about to go on stage and share your story of visiting Kenya when you were very young, returning to Kenya and helping to start an orphanage there. And I see the threads of you noticing the vulnerability of children in Kenya at that time and starting Shura, the orphanage, and what you're doing with writing Small Good News. So first, for our listeners, can you share the story of Shura, the orphanage?
I would love to. So this home was actually founded by a friend's stepmom. She's Kenyan herself and was born and raised in this village. She became very successful and entrepreneur leader in Nairobi Rotary, and she wanted to give back to her community. So they assessed what was happening in her village and determined that AIDS had really decimated the adult population and left orphans who, by Kikuyu tradition, needed to be taken in by their extended families, who themselves were already poor. And these kids were not necessarily given the kind of, well, all the things that children need. They weren't, their extended families weren't able to give them those things. And in fact, they were becoming a burden. So in prior to 2006, Evelyn Mungai is her name, she mobilized her Rotary Club to build the structure of the home and a clinic that goes with it, and really got community buy-in, built the infrastructure for the home. But by 2006, the money was spent, so there wasn't really an assurance that if they took children in, they would be able to fund all of the things those kids would need: food, care, medical treatment, bedding. I mean, you know, all the things a kid would need. Mm-hmm. So that's when I came in, was that in 2006, when my friend got married and donated her wedding to raising money for the orphanage itself. And I said, I don't have a lot of money, but I would really like to participate in this project. So my friend Amy Eldon has a foundation. She's the co-founder with her mother of Creative Visions Foundation. That provides our 501c3 status. And I run the Shura Orphanage Project underneath that umbrella.
How do you think the threads of Shura and getting to know that particular community in Kenya that you really became very bonded to? I know that you have flown back and forth there multiple times. And how does that relate in some ways? How is that coming through in Small Good News, you think, for you now?
I know that I noticed, I don't know how many years ago, I noticed that a lot of the work I was doing in the kind of volunteer realm or in the giving back kind of realm was in Kenya. I grew up always volunteering. I don't know how to not do something besides my regular work life. I've always volunteered for some thing in my community. I'm thinking back, yeah, even in elementary school. I don't know, I just always liked it. The sort of picture of my life didn't feel complete without having at least a volunteer component. And I noticed within the last decade, I guess, I was realizing that most of my giving back to the world was in this other part of the world that's very important to me. I lived there when I was younger. I have many friends who feel like family to me there. So it's my home, but it isn't where I live every day. And I wanted to search for ways to give back meaningfully where I live every day. And my job as a faculty member at Edmonds Community College feels like a meaningful way to participate in the lives of people who are in that community college pipeline. I love the community college mission, but that wasn't enough. So I wanted to attach myself to a more local volunteer work for social justice. And I think the Small Good News piece, to the degree that it's tied to that remote Kenya thing. It's really part of a whole package for me. I'm very committed to my project in Kenya, but I also volunteer at our local emergency services called North Helpline. I'm helping to support a refugee artisans initiative that just got a makerspace in Lake City.
Oh my gosh, how cool is that?
Yeah, and so I'm looking for those ways to participate in acts of social justice that aren't about my job and that are attached to a more local need. On that boundary question, okay, bear with me, but in a way, to get these small good news stories, I have to not have a boundary. I have to not protect myself. I have to be willing to start conversations that are uncomfortable. I have to be willing to walk up to a porta potty with an obviously raving, angry, drug addicted person inside and ask if he needs help. So that there's that way where you're releasing your boundary and or at least the wall that you have between yourself and the world in order to engage. But then what you find can be the protection against the stuff that's scary. So it's like you're letting the boundary down, but then it allows something to come back in its place that protects you from what is being told to us that is false. We're being purposefully frightened by this administration, because this is getting more political now. But this administration is exploiting fear of these people, and to let
fear of our most vulnerable people.
Exactly. And to let that fear that people can use as a barrier between themselves and others, let that go. But let this other thing grow in its place, which is it helps you say, no, that those lies and that fear and that hate is not going to penetrate me. And I need that.
And, some of those moments, like that moment outside that porta potty, was, courageous as well, to realize, that you were just going to stop and you were going to start talking with him and not just keep going, not just pass him by. And, I think these times are calling for a certain amount of courage for us to all dig out, to get beyond the fear and to not let the fear take hold of dividing us and creating this, like you said, false narrative about who we really are.
That's right.
So, and it wasn't only that, you were so respectful when you asked, did he want you to call the police? I love that moment in it when you actually asked him, you didn't decide for him, and that you were leaving that up to him, and that he wanted that help.
What I didn't write, because it just seemed like I couldn't capture it, but I said, okay, I'll call, because of course, interactions with the police can be very negative. We know that too. So I didn't want to call the police if he didn't want me to, as you say. But after I said, okay, I'm going to call. Is there anything else you need? Which is a stupid question. It's a stupid question. And he yelled, he was so mad. He yelled at me, yeah, I need a house. I need a job. I need some friends. I need some food. And I just stood out. I was just, oh, how stupid of me. He is absolutely right. What a ridiculous question. If he had yelled, you stupid bitch at the end, I would have deserved it. I felt like, obviously, he needs a lot else. So
Yes,
it was just
yes. But what a great, truthful exchange too. And, there was something also beautiful about the police response in that they knew the guy. And because again, you're highlighting your neighborhood, your neighbors, you're getting to know these people. And that, of course, local police will know some of the people in the neighborhood too. And, and it probably created a very safe interaction because they knew him.
Right.
You know,
Yeah, and I said
how
to the
important for
officer,
all of us to know each other.
right. Yes. And everybody has a role to play, right? The cops weren't there to be that guy's friend. They were there to solve a problem, but they handled it in a very respectful and human way. Uh, and I said, I'm the one who called. I didn't know if I could maybe help talk him out of there, but I also wasn't sure I wanted to just be standing there when he burst out, because he was really, violently pounding on the walls and raving incoherently for some of the time. And, he was, so I thought, I still was protecting myself a little bit. And I said to the officer, I said, I might have been able to do this myself. I just wasn't sure he's entirely of sound mind and didn't know how he would react when he gets out. And the cop said, you did the right thing. So that was also very reassuring. He just said, yep, he's not in his right mind. You did the right thing. We'll take care of it. So it was just all the way around. It was very positive.
Oh,
Yeah.
I love this. And I think what it does is it gives our listeners a way to think about things that they can also use to look at their own lives and to think about the boundaries that are protecting them. And yet the boundaries they may want to kind of break through to connect to their own communities in some way that feels meaningful in these times when people are feeling pretty distressed and overwhelmed. I think you're offering a lot of different ways for people to look at their own participation and what they can do that uplifts, makes a difference, and helps them feel connected in a meaningful way to the people around them. So thank you for that, Hayden, and thank you for making the time today to really share this small good news with all of us.
Thank you for inviting me, Sarri.